Hey guys, how's it going? I'm trying something a little new here, and we'll be kind of blending in this series alongside my normal farm work videos, which, if you watched my last video, you know, I'm not able to get to those quite as often. So, to kind of help grow the channel, I'm blending in some more personal, experience based, and educational videos as well. Some will be a little more on the educational side, some will just be strictly personal experience. But I thought I'd start off with a topic today that really interests me. Today we are talking about our dairy barns. Got to kick things off by talking about the types of barns, or just more specifically housing, because not all of these are actually barns. We'll go ahead and kick it off with the freestall barn, and this is the type of barn that you guys have seen in the videos from our farm back at home. I'd say these are far and away the most common type of barn that we're seeing in the 21st century here. As you can see in this graphic here, these barns have a number of spaces for the cows to lay in called stalls. It's the cow's free choice to go to the stall, which is why it has the name free stall. Cows tend to like a certain stall or a certain area of the barn in particular, but they do have that choice. Looking here, the cow lays in between these bars here where the stall lines, and then there's a neck rail up front. They have some lunging space for when they need to get up. Behind them, usually their rear ends will just sit right on top of the alleyway. And this allows manure to stay out of the stall for the most part. So talking about some specifications of this, so for like a 1,500-pound cow, we're talking like a mature Holstein, some of the recommended parameters to accommodate a cow comfortably: 48-inch wide stall, 9 feet long, and of that 9 feet, about 68 to 70 inches of that goes to rest, and then the remainder, 38, 40 inches, for lunging space. Bedding should be added on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. Some of the advantages to having a freestall barn: there's less square footage required per cow as compared to some of the other options we're going to see here today. They're uniform in design. The cows may wear them over time. All in all, it's a very uniform product, stall from stall. These tend to stay cleaner than some of our other options, which leads to a lower somatic cell count. For those of you who may not be familiar, somatic cell count is just a measure of milk quality. Keeping somatic cells low enough is an indicator to high quality. A disadvantage of these is that, like I mentioned earlier, cows may select for certain stalls. If there's an irregularity with the stall, that's just not going to get used. It's wasted space, and there can be higher maintenance costs associated with these. In the past, we'll do annual maintenance on some of these stalls as they wear out year to year, realigning them in the right spot. Sometimes the cows like to push them around. Next type of housing we'll discuss is the bedded pack. And unlike stalls, this is just wide, spread out area where the cow is free to lay anywhere within the bedding. These are usually consisting of sawdust or straw, which we'll get to later in some of our beddings. You can see here there's a front feed alley area. The cow will eat her feed up front. She'll stand in this area, and this is where the manure will collect while she's standing. And then in this particular model, in the back is the bedded area, and the cows can walk around the sides to get in and out, and all of the bedding and then eventual manure that the cows will put into that bedding sets here. There's a couple different types of bedded packs. The first would just be the traditional, and if you've watched my videos and you've seen one of us clean out our special needs pen, this is the traditional area. This is the traditional form of the bedded pack, and this just means that we put our bedding on daily. We just throw some sawdust on there, and it gets removed throughout the year a number of times, the entire bed pack. It does have a higher cost for more bedding associated with it compared to its counterpart, which we're going to talk about, but there's less maintenance. The alternative to a traditional bedded pack is a composted bedded pack, and you'll add bedding on regular intervals. And the key here is the aeration process, which should be about twice a day, but what you'll do is, take a tractor with a rototiller, and this allows the manure and urine to get incorporated into the bedding, and it aerates the top of the pack. There's less bedding to maintain there, and so it creates an environment where it's not necessarily just high moisture, which you would get from urine and manure. And moisture breeds those nasty somatic cells we were talking about earlier, which can hurt not only the milk's quality, but the health of the cow as well. An advantage to having this composted bedded pack is slightly better cow comfort in the form of reduced lameness, which is just walking difficulty for the cows, and hock lesions. Not to say that those are a problem in freestalls. A disadvantage, however, like I mentioned earlier, the more space required per animal. So if you had two herds of the same size, and you're building a bedded pack barn and a freestall barn, you'd have to build a bigger barn to get the bedded pack from that space requirement. The next kind of barn that we'll be talking about is the tie stall barn. These are the early type of cattle barns. They're still found today a lot through the Northeast and the Northern Great Plains states for a lot of smaller herds, because these type of barns are not conducive to allowing for larger herds, but for some smaller herds, it's certainly still a strong means. It's a hybrid form of housing because it also doubles as a milking parlor and feeding area. So the cows, they may just stay in the barn, or they could be free to roam with an adjacent pasture. They can come in and out of the barn throughout the day. When they come in to get milked at milking time, there's lines that run throughout the barn, and the milker can hook up the milking machine as they move through. It's a portable milking unit, but that unit will hook up to the line and send milk through the system that way. So the milker can just work their way mobily throughout the barn while the cows just stay there. Finally, the last form of housing for our lactating cows we'll be talking about today is a less permanent form, and that is the pasture. And I have this graphic here from University of Minnesota Extension, and it shows a couple different ways of grazing. The first is continual grazing, and this is just an open fenced-in space for the cow to graze. It's less costly, but there can be fewer efficiencies with the forage due to cows just having their free choice of grazing anywhere in that pasture. And as we move down to our simple and intensive rotational grazing, these methods involve putting cows more concentrated in a smaller space of the pasture, having the pasture divided up into sections, and then intensely grazing that for time interval at a time, moving the cows to the next segment of the pasture, and then coming back around and giving that original section of pasture more time for regrowth. And the forage efficiency that's grown back is a lot greater through more intensive rotational grazing, but we must acknowledge that it has higher costs associated and higher management time that need to be put aside. Next thing I'm going to talk about is, now that we have these barns, or well, really housing, how are the cows grouped? And grouping is not a one-size-fits-all measure for every farm. In fact, a lot of things aren't, but mainly cows are grouped based off of the type of ration that they're going to receive. Now we're going to be moving into different types of bedding that we can use in our dairy barns, and the first is sand. It's been regarded as the gold standard of bedding for its ability to keep cows the cleanest. It helps with that foot and leg health. Like I was saying earlier, you don't need a bedded pack to have great foot and leg health, and it does not promote pathogen growth as well, which is all comes back to those somatic cells. But it takes a lot to maintain sand bedding, and it's something that's not practical for a smaller farm of our size, because sand does not gel with manure equipment. It's also not biodegradable, so you can't have it in your manure when you go to spread your manure on your fields. So sand bedding is going to require sand separation, and so that we don't wear down the manure and we can allow some of the sand to be recaptured, then we can use that dry sand that's good quality and not stuck with manure, we can reuse some of that as bedding and cut down on our expenses. And then we have the manure separated out to spread. Next is sawdust. This is what we use on our farm. Some people may also call it wood shavings, depending on what part of the country you're from. Sawdust is a very thin consistency. Like the rest of these beddings we'll be talking about, it's biodegradable. Next is straw. Straw, a slightly lower quality bedding, but still be an effective bedding. I wouldn't recommend straw as a first option for lactating cows, but we use it on our calves and heifers because there's less contact. The udder, the mammary glands aren't developed at that age, so there's less likelihood of a chance of infection in the heifers, so you can afford to take that risk. There's a couple other options for bedding as well, whether that's corn stalks, shredded like newspaper, even some recycled manure solids that can come out from other forms of separation. It's okay to get creative for sure. Next thing we have to talk about with our barns is manure management. So cows are constantly going to be eating, laying down, walking around, and manure is inevitable in all of those. So where does it go and how do we get it out of there? The first method is having what's called a slatted floor. And if you look closely in some of our videos, our freestall barn does have a slatted floor. So there are small openings, smaller than the width of a cow's feet, where the manure can just fall down into a pit underneath, and then the manure is stored under there where it'll be pumped out at the time of manure spreading. And these slats don't take care of everything. Like, we still run our skid loader across them once a day to get whatever doesn't fall down in there. But the buildup of manure is certainly a lot slower on a slatted floor where that manure has somewhere to escape to. Next is a floor scraper for manure. So in this example, and I have a video here, the arm moves at a very slow pace to where it's not disruptive to cows. It drags the manure along with it and dispenses it at one central location at the end of the drag. It doesn't require having to get a skid loader through there or anything. It's taken care of on its own, and it leaves a really nice manure gloss, if you will, free of any manure hanging around. Then we have our robotic manure scrapers. These things are essentially your portable version of the manure scraper we just saw. They move around and they have sensing capabilities. You know, if there's cows there too, they can move around throughout the barn, but they just accumulate manure inside of their bodies and then they release it back into that central location like we were talking about earlier. It's just an automated form of what we've seen before. And finally, one I find personally to be the most interesting, I didn't see these until I went off to college, but a flush system is where you have to have your barn at enough of an angle where in certain intervals a whole bunch of water will just slide down, and you can see in the video here just the sheer force of the water wipes away the manure and leaves a clean residue. Then the manure is separated out to where it can be spread or turned into manure solids, and then that water is recycled, used only for the purpose of going back into the flush. So another way to recycle some of your materials. And the last thing we need to talk about with our barns here is cow comfort. Cow comfort is something that every producer tries to strive for. Implementing some of these practices gives a modest milk production increase, and a lot of these don't really take much labor, a lot of automation involved. When building a barn, a lot of them tend to face east-west. That is the preferred direction for air movement, and we can ventilate our cows to an extent without even the use of any fans, just that natural ventilation. But fans are very important, and we're going to add those in next. This is our primary cooling system for the cows. They are used to reach an airspeed of about 3 to 5 miles an hour within the barn. Always want air moving at a moderate pace. And these fans can be activated manually or on timers or something based off of like a temperature or humidity index. And the general guideline is when the temperature humidity index is about 68 to 70 degrees, that's when we want to see our fans kicking on, and they have to run around the clock as long as the temperature humidity index is above that. Sprinklers are another form of heat abatement, especially in hotter climate regions. In the United States, it used to be more of a challenge to maintain dairies in the southeast and the southwest due to the heat abatement struggles. But with the additions of sprinklers, it's allowed some of these southern located states that aren't necessarily traditional dairy production powerhouses to allow for expansion across the country. And with these sprinklers, it's just the encouragement of heat loss through evaporative cooling. The sprinklers will come on for a designated time interval. Say it might come on for 5 minutes out of a 15-minute interval. And so it gives cows some time to let the evaporative cooling take place in those down periods. And a lot of times these are attached right to the feed bunk, so it promotes eating and heat abatement at the same time. All right, this really isn't some sort of form of advanced technology, but I lumped this in here, and we have to be mindful of our waters. Obviously, cows have always had access to water. It's what makes up 87% of their milk, and believe it or not, cows drink about 30 to 50 gallons of water a day. So that is a hefty requirement for each of these ladies. It's most common that they drink their water right when they come back from milking. They tend to be parched, and while eating, they'll take breaks to go drink water during that eating time. Typically, a cow shouldn't have to walk more than 50 feet to get access to the water in the barn. And a good rule of thumb is about 3 linear inches of water trough space per cow. So if you go into your barn or you see a barn, measure the perimeter of available drinking water area. You need about 3 inches for each cow and throughout that barn. And there'll be multiple waters throughout a lot of these barns. And finally, the last form of cow comfort that is pretty common in our barns today is just the cow brush. There's not any sort of elaborate scientific study. It just takes a little bit of the eye test to see that, you know, cows rub up against these brushes. It just makes them happier. It stimulates drinking water and eating because this is something they're going to pass through around the barn. Cows itch just like us, so you know, you wouldn't want a cow to resolve her itch by finding some stray piece of scrap metal that may be in a loose panel in your barn or something and scratching up against that, where it could cause injury. These cow brushes just promote a happy, healthy lifestyle in the barn. So thank you guys for checking this one out. This is a new experimental type of video. I hope you guys enjoyed this type of video, and hopefully you're all dairy barn experts now. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.